The story opens on a late, rainy evening in Manchester. The protagonist sits alone in his living room, the dim blue glow of the television flickering over his face. The house is silent, almost too silent, except for the soft hum of the TV and the occasional sound of rain tapping at the window. The living room looks lived in but empty. A half-finished mug of tea, a blanket thrown over the sofa, a few family photos turned face down because they hurt to look at. He feels a hollowness in his chest, a strange mixture of loneliness, confusion, and restlessness that has been haunting him for months but feels painfully sharp tonight. On the screen, a romantic moment unfolds. Two characters leaning close, sharing quiet words, touching in a way that is soft, intimate, and full of longing. Something inside him jolts. A warmth rises sharply in his chest, almost like a lightning strike but made of emotion, not electricity. He swallows hard, unable to look away. His breathing changes, deeper, slower, almost trembling. He whispers to himself, "Why does this feel different tonight?" For the first time, he admits the truth. He craves affection, closeness, warmth. Not just physical but emotional, the kind that reaches into the bones. The scene on screen gets more emotional, the characters holding each other with tenderness he has never received. The protagonist touches his own chest, feeling his heartbeat thumping, quick and hot. His mind floods with thoughts of his life. The strict father who never allowed softness. The neighbors he only speaks to in polite greetings. The quiet nights spent alone. For a moment, he feels that if he doesn't talk to someone, anyone, he might drown in this new intensity burning inside him. His thoughts drift to the man next door. Kind eyes, calm voice, a comforting presence. A man who always smiled at him in a way others didn't. Something about him always felt safe. And tonight, that safety feels like the only thing he needs. Hands slightly shaking, he picks up his phone. He types a message, deletes it, types again, deletes again. Finally, he sends something short, vague, and full of double meaning but still safe. "Are you awake? Could use some company. Feeling a bit too warm alone." The too warm part lingers with a layered meaning, emotional heat disguised as casual phrasing. He instantly regrets sending it, heart pounding. Before he can put the phone down, the reply comes almost immediately. "I'm awake. I'll come over." Sounds like you need someone to help cool you down. The phrasing carries its own double meaning, gentle, teasing, but never explicit. A soft knock. The protagonist opens the door. The neighbor stands there, taller, older, confident but gentle. Rain droplets cling to his hair and jacket. He steps inside with a soft smile. "You look flushed. Long night." The protagonist's voice gets stuck. He only manages a nod. The neighbor's eyes flick briefly to the TV, still showing flickers of romantic scenes. He smirks knowingly, not mocking, just understanding. They sit side by side on the sofa, the distance between them barely a few inches. The neighbor leans back, casually taking off his jacket. Then, with deliberate slowness, he unbuttons his shirt. He says it's because it is too warm from the rain, but his tone suggests he knows the effect it has. The protagonist tries not to stare but can't stop himself. The neighbor chuckles softly. "You're overheating more than I am." The protagonist blushes deeply, stammers a reply, which only amuses the neighbor further. As the neighbor shifts on the sofa, their knees brush lightly. The touch is small but electric. The neighbor notices his reaction and speaks softly. "You're shaking. Cold or something else?" The protagonist looks down at his hands, feeling a storm inside him. The neighbor places a steadying hand on his back, warm, reassuring, grounding. That simple gesture sends a wave of calmness and heat through him at the same time. The neighbor asks, "What made you call me over?" The protagonist hesitates, then whispers, "Just didn't want to feel alone. Not tonight." The neighbor's expression softens. He moves slightly closer, not crossing any lines, but enough that the air between them feels charged. He speaks in a low voice. "You don't have to face that heat alone. Some fires are easier to handle when someone sits with you." The double meaning is deliberate, but the comfort is real. The neighbor turns to him, their faces inches apart. The TV light falls softly across them, making the moment feel cinematic. The neighbor lifts a hand slowly, as if about to cup his cheek, but stops halfway. They share a breath. One single, fragile breath, loaded with emotion and anticipation. The protagonist leans ever so slightly closer, unsure if he wants the moment to happen or is simply unable to resist the pull. Just then, the front door swings open. The protagonist's father storms in, soaked from the rain, face twisted with anger. He takes in the scene, his son flushed, emotional, the neighbor shirtless, inches away, the air thick with unspoken tension. Father explodes. "What is this? What are you doing in my house? Get away from him." The neighbor rises slowly, calm but alert. The protagonist freezes, heart pounding as if someone smashed the moment with a hammer. Father points at his son, shouting accusations he doesn't deserve. He calls him names, questions his character, shouts about shame and reputation. The protagonist's eyes fill with tears. The neighbor steps protectively in front of him. The neighbor says firmly, "You're scaring him. Step back." Father doesn't listen. He roars, "Get out. If this is who you want to be, get out of this house." The protagonist tries to speak but can't. The neighbor gently touches his shoulder and whispers, "Come with me. You shouldn't stay somewhere that hurts you." Father shouts again, ordering him to leave immediately. Heartbroken, trembling, the protagonist steps out into the cold rain. The neighbor follows him, shielding him with his jacket. The protagonist turns around to see the door slam shut behind his father. The neighbor rests a soft hand on his back and says quietly, "You're not alone tonight. Not while I'm here." The walk from the protagonist's family home to the neighbor's house feels longer than it ever has before. Rain drips from the rooftops, the cold wind stings his cheeks, and with every step he feels the weight of his father's rejection tightening around his chest. The neighbor walks close beside him, not touching, but staying close enough that the protagonist feels protected without feeling pressured. When they reach the neighbor's front door, he opens it gently and motions him. After a few moments of quiet, the protagonist begins speaking, haltingly at first, but then openly. He explains how his father has always been strict, cold, obsessed with reputation and control, how he has spent years suppressing emotions and desires he didn't fully understand, how tonight, seeing something tender on the screen, made everything inside him finally spill over. The neighbor listens with full attention, nodding slowly, offering quiet affirmations. He doesn't interrupt. His presence alone feels like a hand held out in the dark. When the protagonist finishes, the neighbor says softly, "Some fires you've kept inside for too long. They needed air. And maybe a little company." The double meaning hangs between them, warm and kind. The protagonist blushes slightly, but he doesn't look away. For the first time in a long while, he feels seen in a way that isn't frightening. As the night deepens, the neighbor gets up and begins preparing tea in the kitchen. He calls out playful comments to lighten the mood. "You look like you could use something sweet," said with a teasing tone and an eyebrow raise that suggests he's talking about more than just tea. The protagonist laughs softly, the sound shaky but real. Feels good to laugh again. When the neighbor returns with 2 steaming mugs, he sits closer this time, their legs gently brushing. The small contact is enough to send a flutter through the protagonist's chest. He tries to hide the reaction, but the neighbor notices and smiles in that soft, knowing way. They talk for hours about simple things at first, local football matches, favorite foods, odd quirks about the town. Slowly, the conversation shifts into deeper, more vulnerable topics. Loneliness, secrets, pain. The neighbor shares pieces of his past too, just enough to show he understands what it's like to feel different, misunderstood. At one point, the neighbor reaches out as if to adjust the blanket but lets his hand linger briefly near the protagonist's waist. The gesture is subtle, intimate without being inappropriate. It says, "I'm here. I'm not pushing. I'm not leaving." The protagonist feels warmth rising inside him again, but this time it's softer, safer. Not the frantic heat he felt earlier. Something steadier, more grounded. He murmurs, "I didn't know someone could make me feel calm like this." The neighbor's eyes soften. "Maybe you just needed the right person sitting next to you." Later, when the rain outside grows harder, the neighbor stands and quietly prepares the guest room. He lays out fresh sheets, fluffs the pillows, opens the window slightly to let cool air in. He tells the protagonist, "Stay as long as you need. No pressure. No expectations." The protagonist hesitates at the doorway, unsure whether to enter the guest room or stay in the living room. The neighbor notices the hesitation and gently touches his arm. "You're not a burden. Don't think of it like that." There's a beat of silence where both of them feel something unspoken pass between them. A pull, a question, a possibility. But the neighbor is careful not to take advantage of the moment. He simply says, "Rest. The world can wait till morning." Before the protagonist steps inside the room, the neighbor adds in a quiet, low tone, "And remember, heat doesn't always mean danger. Sometimes it means you're alive." Another double meaning, delivered with a small smile that makes the protagonist's chest flutter again. Hours pass into the night. The protagonist lies in the guest bed, unable to sleep. His mind keeps replaying the neighbor's warmth, his gentle touch, the closeness on the sofa. He gets up and wanders into the living room. He finds the neighbor still awake, sitting on the sofa with a book in his lap and a soft lamp beside him. When he looks up and sees the protagonist in the doorway, he gives a small, understanding smile. "Couldn't sleep?" The protagonist shakes his head, cheeks warming. The neighbor pats the seat beside him. They sit together again, even closer this time. The protagonist leans his head lightly against the neighbor's shoulder. The neighbor doesn't move away. He adjusts slightly so the protagonist can rest more comfortably. It's a moment of quiet intimacy. No words, no heavy breathing, no inappropriate touches. Just two people sharing space in a way that feels gentle and emotionally nourishing. The neighbor whispers, "You deserve this comfort. Don't run from it." The protagonist closes his eyes, letting himself feel the warmth. He whispers, "It feels safe, being here. With you." The neighbor responds, voice barely above a breath, "Then let's keep you safe." The moment stretches into a kind of stillness that feels like healing wrapped in softness. Not romantic yet, but undeniably charged with possibility. Eventually, the protagonist drifts asleep against the neighbor's shoulder. The neighbor stays completely still, not wanting to disturb him. He looks at the young man sleeping, face relaxed for the first time all night, and whispers to himself, "You've been carrying too much for too long." When morning comes, the protagonist awakens in the guest room, tucked in neatly, clearly moved there gently after he fell asleep. A small note lies on the bedside table in the neighbor's handwriting. "Breakfast is ready when you are. No rush. You're home for as long as you need." The outline for this section ends with the protagonist standing in the doorway of the kitchen, watching the neighbor cook. The neighbor looks up, gives a soft smile and says, "Morning. Feeling any lighter?" The protagonist nods because for the first time in years, he truly does. The morning light fills the neighbor's kitchen with a soft golden glow. The protagonist stands in the doorway, still unsure if he belongs here or if this warmth is temporary. The neighbor looks up from the frying pan, gives a gentle smile, and gestures for him to sit. Breakfast is simple: toast, eggs, tea, but it feels like a meal made with care rather than obligation. Every movement the neighbor makes is calm, deliberate, and comforting. As they eat, the protagonist keeps glancing down, unable to meet his eyes for long. The emotional closeness from last night lingers like an invisible warmth between them. The neighbor notices the occasional tremble in his voice and places a reassuring hand on the table, close enough that the protagonist could touch it if he wanted. He doesn't, not yet, but he feels the pull. The neighbor suggests they get some fresh air to clear their minds. "You've been cooped up in too much heat and hurt," he says with his gentle double meaning. "Let's give your thoughts some room." The protagonist hesitates but eventually agrees, trusting the calm steadiness in the neighbor's voice. Soon, they are walking through the quiet edges of town. The morning air is crisp, cool enough to sting but clean enough to soothe. Birds chirp from treetops, and patches of sunlight break through drifting clouds. The neighbor walks beside him, hands in his pockets, occasionally brushing against the protagonist's shoulder. Each small contact feels intentional but respectful, a reassurance, not a demand. They talk as they walk, light topics at first, then deeper ones. The protagonist reveals more about his past. The pressure to appear normal, the constant fear of disappointing his father, the years of hiding parts of himself he never fully understood. The neighbor listens with the same quiet focus he always has, occasionally offering soft comments that carry gentle double meanings. Like, sometimes the things we hide are the ones needing the most air. The path gradually shifts toward the outskirts of town, where tall trees begin to form a natural corridor. The protagonist feels nervous. "Are we going to the woods?" he asks with a faint tremor. The neighbor smiles softly. "Only if you want to. It's peaceful there. And you look like someone who needs peace more than anything." They continue toward the tree line together. As they enter the woods, the atmosphere changes. The world becomes quieter, softer, as if sound itself is absorbing into the trees. Leaves crunch under their shoes, and the sunlight filters through branches in scattered golden patches. The protagonist feels his heartbeat slow, the tension in his chest easing with each step deeper into the forest. The neighbor walks ahead slightly, glancing back with a grin and saying, "Stay close." The protagonist follows, feeling strangely safe despite the unfamiliar setting. The neighbor's presence acts like a guide, steady, warm, and impossible to ignore. They reach a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, a secluded pocket where the world feels far away. The neighbor sits on a fallen log and pats the space beside him. The protagonist sits close, their shoulders barely touching. A quiet crackle of tension fills the air, not sharp, but gentle and inviting. The neighbor asks softly, "When you look at your life, what scares you the most?" The protagonist thinks for a long moment. "Being alone," he whispers. "Being unwanted. Feeling like there's something wrong with me." The neighbor's expression shifts. Not pity, but fierce protectiveness. He turns slightly, enough that their knees touch. "There's nothing wrong with you," he says, voice low and steady. "You just needed someone who understands the kind of warmth you've been carrying." His voice carries a thick double meaning. Warmth as emotion, warmth as attraction, but still completely safe and tender. The protagonist feels a flutter in his chest, a longing he can no longer push down. But he doesn't move. He waits. The neighbor notices the hesitation and says, "You don't have to say anything. Just breathe. Let this moment be enough." They sit quietly, listening to the rustle of branches overhead. The protagonist leans forward slightly, as if drawn by invisible gravity. The neighbor watches him with soft eyes, his own breath slowing. Then, gently, the neighbor lifts a hand and brushes a leaf from the protagonist's hair. His fingers linger a moment too long, lightning points of warmth tracing along the protagonist's scalp. The protagonist shivers. The neighbor smiles. "You feel that?" he murmurs. The protagonist nods, cheeks burning. But the neighbor doesn't kiss him, doesn't rush, doesn't push. Instead, he lets his hand fall, choosing patience over passion. "Everything that's happening," he says, "only happens when you're ready." Their conversation drifts into quieter territory. The protagonist admits he has never been close to anyone like this. Never felt warmth that wasn't masked by fear. The neighbor listens, offering words that are soft and safe. "Sometimes the people who make us tremble are the ones who steady us too." Eventually, the protagonist asks, "Why are you helping me?" The neighbor's answer is simple but layered. "Because nobody deserves to face their storms alone. And because I care." He doesn't elaborate, but the weight of his tone reveals a deeper truth. Something tender, something growing. The wind shifts, sending a gentle chill through the clearing. Without thinking, the neighbor pulls off his jacket and drapes it around the protagonist's shoulders. But when he leans forward to adjust it, his hand brushes the protagonist's chest, light and careful. The protagonist inhales sharply. The neighbor's eyes soften further. "You're still shaking," he says, his voice almost a whisper. The protagonist murmurs, "It's not the cold." The neighbor's lips quirk into a small smile. "I know." The moment hangs, fragile, glowing, breathless. But the neighbor does not break the safety of it. He lets the tension exist without crossing boundaries. As the sun begins sinking behind the trees, the clearing turns golden. The protagonist watches the light dance across the neighbor's face and feels a wave of warmth he can't explain. The neighbor notices his gaze and says softly, "You're looking at me like you've found something." The protagonist replies, voice trembling, "Maybe I have." The neighbor doesn't move closer, but his voice deepens with tenderness. "Hold on to that. You're allowed to find what your heart has been searching for." They walk back through the woods slowly, each step sinking the moment deeper into the protagonist's heart. On the way, the neighbor brushes his hand slightly against the protagonist's, not holding it, just enough to let him know he's there. The protagonist's breath catches, and the neighbor whispers, "Easy, we've got time." As they reach the edge of the woods, the world feels different, wider, safer, full of possibilities he never allowed himself to imagine. The section ends with the neighbor quietly saying, "Whatever path you choose, you don't have to walk it alone anymore." Morning light filters between the trees, turning the clearing gold, and the narrator wakes before his friend does. He lies still, listening to the quiet breaths beside him, realizing this is the first morning in days he hasn't woken with fear. He studies the man's relaxed face, noticing how different he looks without the world weighing on him. Soft, gentle, almost protective. The double meaning begins here. The narrator's thoughts wander back to the night before, not describing explicit acts, but hinting. The way his hands knew exactly where reassurance was needed, the closeness that made the cold disappear, the warmth he shared without hesitation. The narrator feels both grateful and shy, wondering if the man regrets anything. A moment of panic. What if he wakes up and thinks it was all a mistake? The man stretches, opens his eyes, and the first thing he does is look at him. Not the sky, not the trees, but him. He asks softly, "You all right?" The narrator tries to act normal but fails. The man notices instantly. He shifts a little closer, shoulders touching, and says something teasing yet affectionate. "If you're thinking too loud, I can hear it from here." Narrator blushes. The friend smirks. Another double-meaning moment. The man reassures him subtly, "Last night wasn't an accident. I meant every moment." The narrator nearly breaks from relief. They pack their things. The man keeps giving small touches, hand at the lower back, brushing leaves off his jumper, fixing his collar. These are gentle, caring gestures, each carrying more weight than the narrator can handle. Scene filled with subtext. When they cross a small stream, the man holds his hand longer than necessary. When the narrator stumbles on a root, the man catches him by the waist and doesn't let go immediately. The narrator realizes being with this man feels like belonging somewhere real. The cottage is modest, tucked behind tall hedges, smelling faintly of wood smoke. It feels more like home than his father's house ever did. The friend prepares tea, moving around the kitchen comfortably, and the narrator sits at the table watching him. The domestic quietness becomes romantic tension, the man catching him staring, the soft smile he gives instead of teasing. Tea mugs clink softly between them as the distance keeps shrinking. Narrator confesses, "I don't know where I'm supposed to go now." The man answers without hesitation, "For now, you stay with me." A knock on the door. Unexpected, sharp, breaking the peace. The narrator freezes, thinking it's his father coming to drag him home again. The man places a calming hand on his shoulder before opening the door. Standing outside is the neighbor, the same man who once saw the narrator vulnerable, the one who offered comfort the first night. The narrator's breath catches. The past and present collide. He explains he's been looking for the narrator for 2 days. Then he reveals the truth. The narrator's father wasn't angry because he disliked him. He was angry because he saw a reflection of himself, a truth he had hidden for decades. The narrator is confused, overwhelmed. Neighbor explains gently but honestly, "Your father, he's not who you think." There are pieces of him he never let anyone see. The man in the cottage listens quietly, protective but respectful. The neighbor takes a breath and says it plainly. He's not just angry, he's scared. Because he's like us. The narrator goes still, mind spinning. He doesn't know if he should feel betrayed or relieved. Double meaning emerges again. The neighbor says the father pushed him, the neighbor, away years ago. Even though he kept wanting more time together, the narrator realizes the neighbor wasn't just friendly to him. He had history with his father. The tension shifts from romantic to emotional, deep, identity shaping. The narrator goes pale, thinking this means betrayal. But the neighbor clarifies softly. He asked me to stay because he didn't want to be alone, not because he chose me over you. The narrator feels a strange mixture of jealousy, confusion, and sorrow. But the wood's companion steps in with calm, grounding energy. He sits beside the narrator, shoulders touching, silently reminding him he's not alone. The neighbor sees the connection between the two and gives a small, knowing smile. The neighbor explains. The father panicked seeing his son in an intimate moment because it made him relive the shame he carried for years. He thought pushing his son away would fix everything. A misguided, fearful attempt to stop history repeating. The narrator feels anger, heartbreak, and sympathy all at once. He asks the hardest question, does he even want me back? The neighbor answers honestly, he wants you safe. He just doesn't know how to show love without fear getting in the way. For point 10, the friend from the woods offers the narrator a choice. The man turns to the narrator, not demanding, not pushing, simply asking, what do you want? Not what he wants, not what I want. What do you want? This becomes a turning point. The narrator realizes he's spent years following other people's rules. Now for the first time he gets to choose. Stay hidden? Go back to a father who is broken but trying? Build something new with the man sitting right here? His answer won't be simple, and the outline prepares for the final section where everything resolves. The door closes and the cottage becomes painfully quiet. The narrator sits at the edge of the small sofa, fingers knotted together, staring at nothing while the weight of everything falls on him. The man from the woods sits across from him at first, watching carefully, giving space. Then, when the narrator begins to tremble a little, he moves closer. Slow steps, no sudden movements, until he sits beside him. Their knees touch. The narrator doesn't pull away. The man speaks softly. Whatever you decide, I'm not going anywhere. Subtle double meaning. I'll stay with you, even when the world gets cold. He admits he's terrified of making a decision that hurts someone else or himself. His father's reaction still echoes in him. The neighbor's truth unsettles him. And his own heart is louder than all the noise, telling him that the man beside him is the only place that's felt safe. The man listens, not interrupting. Instead, he gently takes the narrator's wrist, checking his pulse like he's making sure he's still here, still grounded. Another double-meaning moment. It's all right. Let yourself feel what you feel. Don't fight it. The narrator breathes out slowly, almost leaning into the touch. The man suggests a short walk to help settle his thoughts. They step outside. The morning is bright but soft, with dew sparkling on the grass. They walk side by side, shoulders brushing, the man occasionally steadying him when the ground dips. They reach the stone wall overlooking the woods, the same woods where everything changed. Narrator realizes the woods symbolize the shift in his life. From fear to safety, from loneliness to belonging. They pause at the wall. The narrator asks the man quietly, why did you help me? Even before last night, why did you care so much? The man is silent for a moment before answering. Because you looked like someone who'd been holding everything in for too long. Because when you smiled, even once, it felt like watching light return to a place that forgot what warmth was. The narrator blushes but also tears up. No one has spoken about him like that before. The man wipes a tear away with his thumb, slowly, gently. Double meaning rises again. His touch lingers just a little too long. He admits he needs closure. He needs to hear from his father's own mouth what happened that night and why. The man nods and says he'll come with him, not to interfere, but to make sure he feels safe. They walk back to the cottage to prepare. The narrator is nervous but strengthened by the presence beside him. As they leave, the man squeezes his shoulder and murmurs, "You're not going back as someone broken. You're going back as someone choosing what matters." The narrator's heart pounds as the two step onto the familiar street. The neighbor is already outside, as if waiting, giving a small nod of encouragement. The father appears in the doorway, looking exhausted and older than the narrator remembers. The tension is thick. Anger, guilt, fear, love all tangled. The father's eyes go immediately to his son, then to the man standing protectively beside him. The father swallows, clearly emotional. Instead of shouting, the father quietly says, "I thought I lost you." Those words crack something in the narrator. He steps forward, but only slightly. He asks the question he's been carrying. "Why did you throw me out? Why didn't you talk to me?" The father explains through trembling words that seeing him with the neighbor triggered years of buried shame. He admits he was scared his son would suffer the same pain he did. He apologizes, voice breaking, saying he acted out of panic, not disgust. Hearing the father's confession softens the narrator's rage. He realizes his father isn't a monster. He's a man who never had the chance to live truthfully. The narrator approaches slowly. The man from the woods stays respectfully behind. The father finally admits, "I pushed you away because you were braver than I ever was." The narrator cries, not because of pain, but because the words mean everything he wished he'd heard sooner. Father and son share an emotional moment, closing years of distance. The father, hopeful, asks if he wants to return. The narrator shakes his head gently and says, "I forgive you, but I can't go backwards. I need to build something new." The father nods, understanding, and gives permission instead of resistance. He looks at the man from the woods and gives a small, grateful nod, acknowledging the role he played in caring for his son. The neighbor steps forward and explains he stayed with the father because they needed closure too. The narrator realizes everyone here has been living with silence and unfinished stories. The neighbor reassures him, "Your father doesn't hate you. He never did." The father adds quietly, "I never hated myself either. I just didn't know how to stop hiding." This final truth closes the last emotional gap. The father says, "Wherever you go, I hope you find the peace I never did." The narrator replies, "I already found it." His eyes drift to the man beside him, soft, steady, holding his gaze like a promise. The father sees it and smiles sadly but sincerely. The narrator turns away from the house feeling lighter. The man from the woods takes his hand openly for the first time. The neighbor watches them go, nodding in quiet approval. Back inside the cottage, the narrator realizes it truly feels like home. Not because of the walls or the fire or the comfort, but because someone is there waiting for him. The man prepares tea again, just like before. But this time he places a mug into the narrator's hands with a soft smile that says more than words. The narrator steps closer, almost instinctively. The narrator says, "When I'm with you, I don't feel lost." The man answers, "And when you're with me, everything makes sense." They stand close, too close for casual, not close enough for what they both want. The man brushes the narrator's hair back gently, thumb tracing the cheek. Double meaning grows carefully. "If you choose to stay, I'll make sure you never feel cold again." The narrator whispers back, "I don't want anywhere else." The narrator places his hand against the man's chest, feeling the steady heartbeat. The man leans in, slowly, giving the narrator time to pull away, but he doesn't. Their foreheads touch, breath mixing, silence full of promise. No explicit details, just warmth, closeness, connection. The narrator finally feels the peace he's been searching for. The last scene, the two of them standing in the doorway of the cottage. Woods stretching behind them, a future stretching ahead. Hands held together, fingers locked with certainty. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt stories like this. Sparkling Heart. We want to hear from you. What would you do if you found out someone close to you had been hiding a big secret, just like in this story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.